Hi guys, Sean here from digiDirect. Now today we're going to be talking about the Hasselblad X1D, which is a new mirrorless medium format camera from Hasselblad with a particular emphasis on build, ergonomics and controls, image quality, and affordability. Now, Hasselblad is not as big of a name in terms of consumer cameras as something like Canon and Nikon and so on, but they're a Swedish company that's been around for over 150 years, and they have a very long pedigree in making very high quality medium format cameras. In fact, many of you have seen photos taken with a Hasselblad, as modified Hasselblad cameras were used on many of the Apollo space missions. So a lot of those photographs of the moon and so on were taken with Hasselblad. But the Hasselblad X1D is Hasselblad's most accessible camera yet. We'll see again that its strengths are its build, its ergonomics and controls, picture quality and affordability, but let's start with the build quality of the camera. So the body of this camera is immediately impressive, both in terms of its size and its style. So it's a very classy design. It mixes kind of both retro and modern elements, blends it together pretty nicely into what at least I consider to be a very cool looking camera. I really like the look of it. Beyond the style though, the build quality here is among the best that I've ever seen in any camera. So the camera's made in Sweden by Hasselblad, and it's a very solid metal construction here, as you can see, yet it's not very heavy. It's also a fully weather sealed camera. Now the rubberized grip here on the side is one of the best grips that I've held. It's not that flashy to look at, but it just really conforms really well to at least my hand. And this little cross-hatched rubber texture on the side here does a really good job at giving you a lot of extra grip and tackiness that just lets you support the hand grip there really nicely. I really like it. Then of course there's the size of the camera in general. This is an extremely compact camera when we consider the very large medium format sensor that's in here. Obviously it adds some bulk once we chuck on a lens here, but we can compare this to a full frame DSLR like a Canon 5D Mark IV here and see that, you know, this is every bit as portable as one of those cameras, if not more so even. Now moving on to the button layout, they've done an excellent job here of keeping it functional yet minimal. There's not an overabundance of buttons across the body, but there's button controls for all of the major features that I want to control via physical buttons. So we've got ISO, white balance, AF/MF toggle, as well as AF point selection, a few navigation buttons, a mode dial that ingeniously kind of pops up and then back down into the body, which is really cool, a couple control dials, shutter button, and that's the bulk of it. Now the reason why they don't need 50 buttons and a joystick across the body here is because of this really well implemented touch interface that they have on this camera. Now this is how I want camera interfaces to be. These days we're all used to using smartphones and all their touch, swiping and so on. We haven't really seen that implemented very well yet in camera systems. This is one of the best implementations of it that I've seen so far. It genuinely speeds up your usage of the camera and is helpful. It's not just a gimmick. Now the main menu screen here has 9 programmable icons that you can use to set up your most used settings, and you can easily swap in and out what these icons are. And as well as on the side, you've got your main menu settings for photo, video, and general settings. You can also swipe down from the top at any time to reveal your photo settings. And similarly, you can click any setting in here, use the touch settings to set it to whatever you want. Although I will say you don't need to use the touch setting here. You can use the physical controls, the 2 control dials, ISO, white balance buttons, and so on. We also have 3 custom modes that we can assign here and save and recall at any time. Now, of course, let's look at the beautiful 50 megapixel medium format sensor in here. This is a 44mm by 33mm sensor. Now, it's not the largest medium format sensor out there. Medium format has a number of different sizes, but it is quite a bit larger than your standard full frame sensor. And we'll see that once we get to image quality here in terms of the sharpness and detail that it provides. More on that in just a sec. The camera also has a hot shoe mount on top. Currently, it's compatible with Nikon TTL flashes. I've been told that in the future they do expect to expand this compatibility with firmware updates. We have dual UHS-1 SD card slots on the side here, and we can of course control how the media is addressed. You do also have an HDMI, USB 3, mic, and headphone jacks here on the side. The battery at the bottom here kind of has a bit of that Leica design where the bottom of the battery is actually the base of the camera as well. It's rated for about 400 shots. The camera also has built-in Wi-Fi, which allows remote control of the camera using their Focus app, as well as GPS. Lastly, let's take a quick look at the lenses. So currently there's 3 lenses out for the system, which is called the X mount. There's a 30mm f3.5, 45mm f3.5, and a 90mm f3.2. Now in full frame equivalency terms, in terms of focal length, these are about a 24mm, 35mm, and 70mm. There's also an upcoming 35 to 70mm zoom and a 65mm prime that are going to be out later in the year, as well as, I've been told, more lenses beyond that. There's also going to be an adapter that allows you to put Hasselblad H-mount lenses on this camera as well. Now, an interesting point about these lenses is that they're actually all leaf shutter lenses, which means the shutter is actually in each lens, not in the body of the camera. That's a bit unique and interesting, and one benefit of this is that the flash sync of this camera can now be all the way up to the max shutter speed of the camera, which is 1/2000th of a second. So if you're using flashes a lot, that's going to be a big benefit on this Hasselblad camera here. Okay, so we can see that they've done a really good job on the body, ergonomics, and controls of this camera. I really like that part of this camera. But how about the image quality? How does that stack up? Well, as you would expect from a camera from Hasselblad, a company with a pedigree in medium format imaging, this camera takes stunning photos. So as I mentioned, it has a 50 megapixel medium format sensor in there, and that means you've got a lot of resolution and a ton of detail and sharpness on these photos. You can see as we crop into a pretty extreme degree here how long that sharpness holds up all the way down to a very fine detail. So you can crop in a lot on these photos if you need. You can blow them up very large. Just exceptional image quality coming out of the camera. Really, really nice photos. You definitely can see the difference compared to full frame, and I think a lot of people are really going to get their money's worth in terms of the image quality coming out of the camera. So very happy from that perspective. So let's touch on the autofocus system here on the X1D. It has 35 contrast detection autofocus points. The autofocus system is serviceable. It's functional, it does its job. It's not the highlight of this camera, certainly. This is not a sports and action camera. When you're photographing your traditional medium format subjects, portrait work, studio work, landscapes, architecture, all that kind of stuff, it'll be completely fine. But if you're coming off using, a recent consumer camera where they have made some pretty big advances in autofocus recently, like an A6500, for example, you will notice the difference. But for the most part, it's not a problem. It does its job, and it, kind of gets out of the way. I will say though, I reviewed the Fujifilm GFX 50S recently. The autofocus on that camera compared to this camera, it's about the same. Both of these cameras have autofocus systems that are okay, but they're not the star of the show in either of these cameras. But it's functional. Now this camera does have video functionality. I doubt most people are buying this camera for that, but it has it, certainly. It can shoot 1080p video at 30 frames per second, and other than that, there's barely any controls beyond that. There's no controls over picture profile, codec settings, and so on, but it does its job in a pinch, and while it's not 4K video, it is still quite nice and looks nice and detailed. I will say that achieving focus pulls and so on this camera is really nice. The manual focus rings on these lenses do a really good job at giving you nice smooth focus transitions. You also do have focus peaking and a nice focus punch-in button to check your focus, so it's quite easy to achieve good focus in video on the camera, which is good. So it's a fairly basic video mode, yet serviceable, but again, not something that I think most people are buying the camera for. Now I do have a couple negatives about the camera, although they're fairly minor. Now the viewfinder is decent enough, although it's definitely not the highest quality viewfinder on the market. But it does have a longer than what you would expect blackout period after you take a photo. This comes down to the leaf shutter nature of the lenses. You get used to it after a while, but if you're coming from a camera that doesn't do that, it can be a little bit jarring. Now the SD cards, when you take a photo, photos currently are being saved to SD cards uncompressed and they're full size. So right now it's about 110 megabytes per photo, and that's very, very big. Now in the future, they are going to put out a firmware update which allows it to compress the files, putting it on the SD card, which is going to significantly reduce that file size. You can then uncompress them when you go to process them. So if you're watching this a couple months later, this is probably fixed by now, but if you're an early purchaser, just be aware of that, those large file sizes for the time being. And finally, as I've touched on already, both the AF system and the video functionality on this camera are fine, but they're not going to blow anybody away. However, they are in line with that Fuji camera and the Pentax camera, so that may be more of a comment on this type of camera rather than this exact camera. By and large, though, those are fairly minor gripes, and overall, I think that the Hasselblad X1D is a camera of exceptionally high quality. So the build and the ergonomics here are one of the best that I've seen from any camera, and especially that control implementation, the touchscreen implementation, that's something that I hope most other manufacturers will take note of for the future. Definitely a very strong point. Then you combine that with the exceptionally high image quality coming out of that 50 megapixel medium format sensor, put it all into a body size that's small and even smaller than most full frame DSLRs, and then price it in a price point that's very affordable compared to most medium format cameras, and I think Hasselblad has a real winner on their hands here. I think this is going to be a very popular camera. Personally, I really like shooting with it. Now, because a lot of the success of this camera comes down to the controls and the feel of the camera and so on, if you're potentially interested in this camera, I would make a sincere effort to, get it in your hands and give it a play. If you live in Australia, you can come into one of our stores. We have it on display. You can try it out. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and a new one in Cannington, Western Australia. You can also order the Hasselblad X1D on our website at www.digidirect.com.au. Thanks, guys. Take care.